there's certain biological markers that you can measure that measure the aging of cells. Because the aging of cells is not simply chronological. People who are stressed, their cells age much more quickly. And you can measure these things now. Or levels of inflammation in the bloodstream. Inflammatory markers. So the more inflammatory markers there are, the more prone for illness you're going to be. So they looked at these biological markers at the beginning of the study, and then 7 years later, something like that, and the group of children that had received, whose parents had received the benefit of the program, their cells were younger, and they had less inflammation in their bodies than the children whose parents had not received that training. Same economic background, same racial oppression, really, that exists still in the southern United States. Just the quality of the parenting made that biological difference. So I'm really aware these days of the power of the family and the power of the unwitting. And it's power that parents wish they didn't have, I'm sure. But the fact is that we do. The good news is, as those studies showed, that intervention can actually make a difference. In terms of this workshop, I'm actually confident that if we can de-stress the relationship between adult parents and their children, that's going to be to the health benefit of both of you. And not just to the health benefit of both of you, but also the health benefit of the next generation of kids that are maybe being raised on these families. So these studies, daunting and challenging as they are to read about, they also give a good reason.
You ever wonder if stress could actually change your body, like down to your cells? Turns out it totally can. There's this wild thing scientists found where they can literally measure how fast your cells are aging, not just by how old you are, but by how much pressure you're under. It's like your body's little secret clock, ticking faster or slower depending on the weight of your world. Anyway, here's the kicker. They did this study with a group of kids whose parents went through this stress-reducing program. Fast forward 7 years, and the results were insane. These kids' cells actually aged slower. They were healthier, less inflamed, same neighborhoods, same struggles. But one group had this unexpected edge. And here's where it gets crazy. None of this was about diet, exercise, or anything like that. It all came down to how the parents were handling stress. Same schools, same neighborhoods, same daily grind. But somehow the way parents manage their stress actually rewired their kids' biology. Think about that for a second. Stress wasn't just affecting the parents. It was shaping their kids' future health. It's like these invisible threads connecting one generation's mental state to the next generation's physical well-being. And if that's true, imagine what else we're passing down without even realizing it.
Someone else wrote a comment, I think it's directed at me, where they quoted one of my heroes, Melania Trump. He said, "It's tough to be in the shadow of greats. Go your own path and be best." It's great advice. What's the point? I think there's at least a grain of truth in every single one of those comments. And it kind of delights me that to see people looking at this through their own filter and coming up with whatever they come up with. And I just say that in the spirit of inviting you to experience this through your own filter. And at the same time, being curious about your own filter. Being curious about your point of view. through tonight and through the weekend. And we're going to elaborate more on that as to why that's so important. It's very good practice in your actual relationship. It's kind of the key practice to having a fresh start. I want to talk about fantasy versus reality, which is pertinent to what each of us is going to be going through this weekend, as I'll talk about. But it's also, when we started this 4 years ago, I don't remember what I expected to happen, but looking back, I can see that I had a bunch of fantasies about what doing this was going to get me in this relationship, how it was going to change. And at the time, they would have seemed like perfectly reasonable expectations. I've been learning, I could say the hard way, but really it's the only way I was going to learn, that wherever I have an expectation of how it's supposed to go, I'm wrong. And I'm going to be proven wrong, and to the extent that I don't want to be proven wrong, I'm going to suffer. So I'll share a bit about what's been happening there, but particularly in the last year, the reality of things has been becoming more clear, and actually that's the single biggest breakthrough I would say in the quality of my relationship with my parents since we've started this. I want to tell you a story that pertains to this. A couple of years ago, I strongly recommended to both my parents that they go see a local production of a New York musical, a Broadway musical that won the Tony Award. It might have even won the Pulitzer, I forget. I had already seen it 3 times, including once with my mom. And it came here and was playing at the Arts Club, and I saw that production, and I thought it was very fine, very, very good. And the show is called Fun Home. Has anyone heard of Fun Home? Yeah, not too many. So Fun Home is based on a graphic novel by a woman named Alison Bechdel. And if the name Bechdel sounds familiar to you, you may have heard it in conjunction with the Bechdel test, which is sort of an informal way of gauging whether a movie, a Hollywood movie, treats women like full human beings. The criterion being, is there a scene in the movie where 2 women talk to each other about something other than a man? And a shocking number of movies fail the Bechdel test. So anyway, she's also a cartoonist. She's a lesbian cartoonist around my age, or at least she was when she wrote this. And Fun Home is her grappling with her childhood and her relationship with her father. Now, she grew up in a funeral home, which is where the title Fun Home comes from. And also a refurbished, renovated home. Her father was obsessed with his work, obsessed with refurbishing and renovating old antique homes. He was also a high school English teacher. So he was a very busy, you might say, workaholic guy. And, she came out in college. She only started to realize maybe when she was 9 that she was gay. But what she didn't know until she was in college is that her father was also a closeted gay man. And before she could really integrate that revelation, he had killed himself. He had jumped in front of the truck. And so on the surface, I didn't grow up in a funeral home. I'm not a lesbian. The circumstances didn't particularly resonate, but something about this show, more than anyone I'd ever seen, shook me to my core. And I sobbed at the end of it the last 3 times I saw it. I don't cry at musicals. So it really meant something to me. Also, as a writer, I just think the craft is so impeccable and wonderful. So all of that to say, I was passionate about it. And I recommended to my parents that they go see it. And my mom said, okay, I'll see if I can drag your father. And I was out of town when they finally did. And you know how when someone is doing something you recommended that you really care about, you're kind of on tenterhooks to find out what they thought of it? I didn't hear anything that night. So the next day, I emailed my dad and said, so, what'd you think? And pretty soon after, I got a one-word reply, not a one-word reply, a one-sentence reply. I said, so the question was, what did you think of Fun Home? His email said, not fun, wished I was home. It's pretty clever, right? It's actually a good line. But I'll tell you something, I wasn't laughing. In fact, I felt punched in the gut. I felt like I'd been stung. There were, maybe punched in the gut is a little bit overdramatic, but it was an ouch. It was this visceral feeling of ouch. And then the other feelings started to flow: angry, hurt, disappointed, exasperated. And I would also say deflated, like actually almost a physical sensation of having the air go out of me. And almost instantaneously, I can't even actually place which came first, the thoughts or the emotions, but then the thoughts start coming in, of course, you know, the stories. Oh God, you're so close-minded, you're so archaic, you're so contrarian and grumpy. And, you know, why can't you just open yourself to an experience outside of your frame of reference for once, you know?
Listen, don't hold back now. Just say it.
I never hold back. This is the stuff that was going on in my head. You gotta tell the truth about what's going on in your head. And, you know, and then came a memory. And the memory was this. I'm driving home. It's from 1990, I guess, so I would have been 14. And I'm driving home over the Oak Street Bridge back from Richmond in my father's car. I'm in the shotgun seat. My friend Ross is in the back seat. And we've just come from a movie. We've just seen Presumed Innocent with Harrison Ford. And it was my second time seeing it. And as you can guess, I had really recommended to my dad that he come and see it. I really wanted him to see it. I just thought it was an impeccably crafted piece of cinema. I just thought it was so exciting. It's also a little titillating. It might have been my first time seeing a movie like that, you know. But I just thought it was of such quality, and for some reason I really wanted to share it with him. So we're driving home over the Oak Street Bridge. It's dark. And he hasn't said anything since we left the theater. He's been very quiet. And I lean over to him and I say, well, so what'd you think? And he says, you want to know what I thought? And I said, yes, Dad, I'd like to know what you thought. And he said, I thought it was a hateful piece of filmmaking. I thought it was hateful. And I said, what do you mean hateful? And he went on to explain that he thought it was nasty and misogynist, that the only two women characters were very deeply unsympathetic, and, you know, sexuality was made into a violent thing and all this kind of stuff. Now, you know, 21-year-old university-age reading radical feminists might have totally agreed with them, but at the time, again, I felt deflated. And I realized that I have a long-standing grievance around this. Now, grievances have a way of getting lodged in there. And lodged can mean stuck. It can also mean housed. And, you know, we're like the innkeepers who sort of check out and don't notice that the guest has stayed for 40 years. And I've begun to think that underneath every grievance, there's a relationship between the word grievance and grief. And that underneath every grievance, there's actually a wound that has not been grieved. And so it is papered over by all of this narrative and these sort of habitual responses and, well, just reactions. And so when the Fun Home thing happened, it sent me, because we were already doing these workshops, it sent me into an inquiry. First of all, I thought it was so poignant. You know, here I am doing Hello Again with my father. I recommend to him a show about parent-adult-child relationships. He dismisses it in one line, doesn't have a good time, and I'm crushed. What's that about? It was just curious. And if you can get curious about these things that happen, the dramas that explode between us sometimes, or just kind of crop up, you're already many steps ahead than continuing to participate in the drama. And I did notice this was kind of, you couldn't write this shit. Like, this is pretty funny. And so here's what I know about grievances. Every grievance has a should to it. it should be some other way than it is. One of my favorite shows, The Wire, which very fortunately my father loved as well after I recommended it. I'd have to disown him if he didn't love that one. I think I've seen it like 5 times. So I think it's season 4, episode 2, The Cold Open. A character named Marlo, who is a real badass drug pusher with no conscience, just cold-blooded, says to a childhood friend of his who's become a security guard and is now just working at a store. And Marlo's just stolen a lollipop. The guy follows him outside. He says, "Hey man, you can't do that. You can't put me in that position. I have kids. I need this job." Marlo sucks on the lollipop, looks at him and says, "You want it one way." I says, what are you talking about? He says, "You want it one way." And he just keeps repeating it. The guy's he's torturing the guy. Finally he says, "You want it one way, but it's the other way." And that is what a fantasy is like in our lives. It is a certain way, and we hold on to this image of how it could be, how it should be. Now, underneath how it should be, as I just said, there's an assumption that it could be some other way. So when I say that, my dad should be more open-minded, more curious, more receptive, more nuanced in his thinking, more interested in how I see the world and wanting to share things with me, what I'm actually saying is that if he really cared enough about me, he would be, he could be, but he somehow isn't, and therefore he must choose not to. And if we follow that one down the rabbit hole, it must mean that therefore he doesn't respect me or love me. And we follow that one all the way down, it means that, oh well, my poor wound, my poor belief was absolutely right all along. I don't have a home in this world. So you can see how actually out of the seed of a core wound grows all this architecture, all this scaffolding that looks very complicated. I call that notion that he could be some other way a working theory. And in our introductions, it was mentioned that I do this mental chiropractic thing. I walk with people, and I talk about the working theory often with people. My favorite example of it was when one of the first people I walked with presented to me a problem with a colleague who just drove him crazy. Couldn't stand this person. And this is after years of trying to be collegial and friendly and just human with this person and just getting rebuffed at every opportunity. And I said, okay, well, what's your working theory here? How does this play out? How's this going to get resolved? How should this go? Not the enlightened answer, just tell me the truth. And he thought about it and he said, okay, well, I think if this person didn't exist, I think that I'd feel better. I said, that's brilliant. That's awesome. You just identified your working theory. Your working theory is that until such time, and unless time travel is invented, so you can go back and pull a reverse Marty McFly in Back to the Future and prevent this person's parents from conceiving, or until you hire a contract killer, which I know you're not going to do, this problem is irresolvable. And you're stuck with this experience of being frustrated. And he actually laughed. He said, yeah, that's kind of absurd. I said, well, that's the binder. And immediately the whole thing lightened. So this fantasy has a working theory attached to it that, to borrow a Hungarian proverb that my dad has often used, I really love it, it's based on a theory that's so false that not even the opposite is true. It's based on a completely nonsensical, absurd premise, which is that either time travel is possible, or the other person could be some other way, or that I can make them some other way. It's also based on the working theory that if my parent now were to give me what they never gave me, I would be satisfied. That would do something for me. And that is not true, because grievances, as long as they remain in the shadows, are insatiable. And they're incentivized too. I mean, there's very good reason to hold on to grievances. And fantasies. They're soothing, and they keep us from taking big risks. So, what's the solution to all this? Well, for those of you who are coming this weekend, you'll get to explore that, but I want to share for everyone here just some of what I've been pondering about this. When it comes down to it, it's just facing the truth, like the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And in order to get to that is that I have to scrape off all the shellacking, all the varnish, all of the scaffold. I have to tear down all the scaffolding of the story that I built up, or at least just put it aside and see that's the fantasy of the father I should have had. And just look at, but it also doesn't mean erasing or like gaslighting myself into saying, no, actually, it was a pretty good childhood and, I shouldn't have taken it so personally at the time. Neither of those things will work. Here's the truth, and this is true for all of us. I was born at a certain time, in a certain place, to a certain family, or a certain lack of a family in some of our cases. And I was born with certain temperaments, and I got what I got, and I didn't get what I didn't get, and that shaped who I am. And that's the truth. And more specifically, there were certain specific needs that got either not met or totally violated in our childhoods. Certain needs, unless you actually had the perfect childhood, and I haven't met anyone who did. And I'm not going to get into details, but very shortly after our last Vancouver workshop, I was able to hone in on exactly what that need was that I had that had gone unmet. And when I realized it, something gave way for me. And I actually it was very visceral, and I tumbled into about 3 months of being quite depressed, but also feeling, it wasn't just like a pointless depression. It felt like a re-incubation or a hibernation that needed to happen. And I actually did something I've never done. I took space, quote unquote, from my parents. I barely talked to them for that 3 months. Now, for some of you, that might be totally normal. In my family, that goes against the grain. And during that time, I started fortifying a new awareness, which is that, and the fantasy died. I just kind of died of its own accord. These people can't give me what I need. And time can't be changed. And it's not up to them to give me what I need. And even if they could, I wouldn't be satisfied. And not only that, they're not the same people who raised me. We don't notice the passage of time, right? You look at your father. He just looks like your dad until maybe the very, very end you realize, oh my God, look at this old person. But, I look at him and I see the man who raised me. But the man who raised me was 30 years old. I'm 44. So that guy doesn't exist. He also exists in a fantasy. I'm face to face with all of that. Let me just scan my notes here so I can appreciate, so I can get off the stage and stick to my time limit. Yeah, getting in relationship to the reality means I'm also getting in relationship to the reality of what I need now. Because that need was legitimate. And for me, my parents have tried for a long time to empathize with and almost feed me cues about how I was traumatized. You can imagine growing up in my particular family, trauma is talked about all the time. But it was never very helpful to me to hear from them that I had a traumatic childhood. Because I didn't have a relationship with what that meant to me. It's like I had amnesia and I was taking their word for it. And that actually compounded the problem. And what I discovered was very simple. It was one word, it was respect. I never doubted that my parents loved me. But I did not have the consistent experience of respect. And when I got that, and I also got next to that it can't fill that hole in me. That's a void. It's mine. Well, then I started to put my interest on, both actually was respect and stability, both those things. I started to put my attention on what can I do to create a condition of respect and stability in my life. And then once I was ready, I was able to share about this with my parents in a way that wasn't accusatory. It wasn't putting them on the hook. I wasn't expecting anything from them. I was just informing them, this is what's going on. I said to them, I realized, I have a spiritual concussion from some of our interactions, and you may be the brick wall that I ran into, but it's my concussion and you can't heal it. So I'm not blaming you, and these are the conditions that I need to be well, to grant myself respect and integrity. And like that, our relationship started to shift. Not like that, but it was a good demarcation point. And then it took following through on that. And there's been stumbles, and there's been, but I'm telling you, we've been having a higher order of problems since then. And I once heard it said that if you want to have a great life, don't try to get rid of your problems. Get better problems. Your problems are boring and shitty. If you want to have an extraordinary life, have extraordinary problems. And I feel like we're leveling up. And, honestly, and maybe this is the last thing I'll say, is, I do have an advantage. Some people you might be sitting there thinking, especially people who, come here because they know this guy and admire him and are grateful to him for the work he's done, as I think is fitting. But some people have an assumption that it must have been that I have an advantage over people because of the family I grew up in. And I would just say that's an optical illusion. There are plenty of perks. There are also drawbacks that are, more nuanced and harder to see, but they're there. But I think we all have it tough, and we all have, there are upsides. And then there are some people with really dire situations. But one thing I do have that many of you don't have, and it's only recent that I have it, is a professional relationship with my dad now. And that's actually been a great arena in which to move forward. It was actually really only at our recent Toronto workshop that I realized this, because in this environment, there's just no time to mess around with all of the old stuff. I mean, yeah, if you've watched our videos, if you've been at our own events, it's come up, right? But I finally got it in Toronto. I'm like, we are not more important than this workshop. My feelings of hurt are not more important than any of you sitting in the seat. In fact, what's really important is delivering what we came here to deliver. And that creates a sense of stakes. All of a sudden, we have a better problem. We have a better problem than who's right, who's wrong, what happened 40 years ago, what happened in the Budapest ghetto in 1944. We actually can put the past in the past and be here with a bigger intention that's not about us, but it includes us. And I just want to say that that's available to anyone. I'm not recommending that you go into business with your father or mother and start leading workshops about parent-child relationships. In fact, I hope you don't. We don't need the competition. But if you create stakes, first for yourself, and then invite the other openly. A real invitation has no consequence if they say no. But then you create a space in which new things can happen. And I feel like I've said a lot of things that will need elaboration and exploration, and that's what the weekend's for, and certainly it's what the Q&A is for. How the rest of the evening is going to go is that Galbert's going to come up, he's going to speak for a while, then we're both going to sit down together and have a conversation on stage. Then we may or may not take a stretch break, and then we'll have a Q&A for the rest of the night, and we finish at 9:30. So thank you so much for listening, and have a great night and a great weekend for those of you who are with us all weekend.
It's funny how we expect people to validate our experiences, like Daniel did with his dad. We pour ourselves into something. Maybe it's a show, a passion, a personal belief, and we expect the people we care about to meet us there. When they don't, it's like a slap. But here's the thing. Maybe the real pain isn't that they didn't get it. It's that we keep expecting them to. I mean, we've all been there, right? We have this deep need for our parents, friends, or partners to show up for us in these specific ways. And when they don't, we take it personally. Like, if they really cared, they'd see me. They'd know this matters. But at some point, it's worth asking, are we setting ourselves up to be hurt by expecting things they might just not be capable of? What hit me about Daniel's story isn't just the sting of his dad's email. It's that he was still tied to this old narrative. A story that had been replaying since that car ride home in 1990. That expectation he had as a kid, wanting his dad to validate him, that's still hanging on. And let's be real, we all have our own version of that story. It's less about them disappointing us and more about us refusing to let go of the hope that they'll magically change. But here's a twist. What if the real growth comes when we stop hoping for someone else to validate our experience? Like, instead of waiting for our parents or whoever to finally see things our way, we shift that energy inward. Start validating ourselves. It's scary because it means accepting that we might never get what we needed from them. But it also means freedom. You can love people without needing them to fill that void. It's a game changer. So yeah, maybe the hardest part isn't accepting that someone else won't change. It's accepting that we don't need them to anymore.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah? So I have to say it's a bit frightening, this congruence that's going to happen here, because we've been kind of feeding off the tensions, and people say how brave they are and courageous, sharing their stuff, and what's going to happen when the stuff disappears and we're actually cooperating really smoothly? It's going to be a totally boring show. That's what my concern is.
I'm pretty sure I could get pissed off about something if you really want.
And what I'm referring to is that every part of this workshop is planned. So that's starting tomorrow morning. We're working according to a schedule that's designed to move the process forward for all the participants. The part that's not planned is the talks that we give on Friday evening, such as the one Daniel just uttered and the one I'm engaged in giving you now. And what's frightening about that is how similarly themed, though, that our talks are, even to the degree of quoting the YouTube comments, which I had also copied out almost some of the same ones. Exactly. I'd like to begin, though, with, let me just tell you, I'm over a severe bout of laryngitis, tracheitis, so I may have a bit of a dry cough. I'm not infectious anymore, it's just a bit of an irritation. I'd like to begin with gratitude, first of all, for Hollyhock. This workshop was generated over coffee with the previous program director here at Hollyhock, Leslie Hoffman, who subsequently went to New York. And somehow, I think she's the one that envisioned us doing this workshop. And and that workshop this is its 6th or 7th iteration, and it's going to become a book, and all because we had coffee with somebody from Hollyhock a few years ago. But the deep gratitude I want to express is actually to you, Daniel. I'm just grateful to be in a position to be creating this project with you and to be working with you. And I'll say more about that acknowledgement later on, but I want to begin with it. Because the reality is that although we've had a working relationship since this began in 2016, we've had a working relationship, but that doesn't mean that the relationship was always working. And literally, either before or during or in the immediate aftermath of each of these workshops, including the one we just had in Toronto a few weeks ago, there's been major blows, major issues between us. And what I'm grateful for is that you hung in there.
You too.
By the way, I had one of my genius ideas today when in a swimming pool. That's one of the best ideas come to me, and I know some of you are participating in the workshop as parents and children, like together, but some of you have just come as parents, right, without the child, and some of you are serious, just the child without the parents. And my genius idea was that just adopt each other. Forget about those fools that didn't count. And your problems will be solved. Well, let me read you some of the comments I copied out from YouTube. Now, if you watch including the one that I could stay home and watch the same sitcom with my in-laws, I copied that out. One of the tensions between Daniel and I working publicly has been my perception that he talks too much. And I happen to say so on stage here in the middle of our first presentation. And here's somebody's comment, which is the one that's on YouTube and has had 210,000 views by now. And this person writes, I never thought Daniel was talking too much. In fact, the period when he was talking too much, when I was learning so much, I wanted him to talk more. Truly, Daniel has a reason to feel not deeply appreciated or heard, as most relationships are, and I'm so glad that his father is beginning to appreciate this fact and to turn it around. And then, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but then I copied out the same one that Daniel copied out about when you get deep into this video and really listen and pay attention, you see a profoundly toxic narcissism in the father gap. So I'll come back to that idea of, and what I'm going to talk about narcissism, and I would argue that it's true that I'm a narcissist. I just don't think I'm a toxic narcissist. I think it's an important distinction. One of the distinctions being that the toxic narcissist doesn't realize that he's the narcissist, toxic or otherwise. But in any case, I did copy that quote out, and then there's another one here. Oh my God, Gabo is so not over it. Does Gabo take responsibility for his first action that caused the reaction, and his reaction and the reaction? No, he does not. And finally, felt you were hurtful to your son, Gabo.
What was that?
Felt that you were hurtful to your son. I felt you were hurtful to your son. And I thought, what's going on here? And so I scroll down, and finally somebody says, I like Gabor, but Daniel seems less authentic to me somehow. And I thought, finally somebody's getting it. And another one that said, agree with Gabor. Daniel likes the sound of his own voice, and I felt he put himself in competition with his father, etc. You know, so I make the same point that Daniel made, which is that it's interesting what people see. Because I think, as Daniel said, there's more than a kernel of truth in all of those comments, all of those observations. It's just that each of us carries our own screen. And it's through that screen that we see the world. And that screen will allow some perceptions or facts or interpretations to penetrate, and others will be left out. And we're not aware that we're carrying the screen. And it's like that Rorschach test, you know, they used to do this in psychoanalysis where somebody's shown a nondescript, shapeless picture, but then they generate what that means to them. And to each person it'll generate something else. That the standard joke is that, you know, the psychologist presents the same picture to three people, and what do they see? Well, the picture is two parallel lines on a you know, flat lines on a page. And the first person says it's obviously a railway track without the ties connecting the rails. And the next person says, well, no, what it actually is it's a picket fence, but with the picket boards missing, just the top and the bottom. And the third person says, it's obviously a man and a woman having sex. And the psychologist says, what are you talking about? It's just two straight lines. He says, don't ask me. He says, you're the one drawing the dirty pictures. And that's kind of how life is, you know. Life itself is a Rorschach test. And how we respond to it, including the responses to our work together, and quite probably including the responses that many of you might be having this evening or tomorrow. The Rorschach test says at least as much about you as it says about, thank you, as it says about what you're witnessing. And I mention that because it's so totally true in our relationship with my son. That so much I perceive now that so much of the upset that I've had at our various stages of our joint working career has been perceptions that I've had, interpretations that I've made. And the same thing could have happened. But had I had a different interpretation, there would have been no upset, or it would have been handled very differently. And so that's one of the lessons that you know, I've done a lot of work on trauma healing and engaged in various spiritual practices, and it's all been good. But really, when you come down to it, the hardest spiritual work is actually in your daily life. And if by spirituality we mean not some religious or esoteric concept or ultimate reality, but simply mean actually how we're relating to reality at this present moment, and how we relate to reality at this present moment, as Eckhart Tolle teaches us so eloquently, depends very much on our degree of consciousness, our degree of awareness. Well, that consciousness is gained most with the greatest effort, I think, but also with the greatest impact in our personal relationships. Because it's in our personal relationships that we tend to lose consciousness and become reaction machines based on old patterns. And it's, for me, that's been quite a challenge, because I don't want to tell this audience, but when I go out there, I get a lot of appreciation and gratitude and acknowledgement and thanks and love. And some of the milder comments say that I should be president of the world, you know. That's, people write that kind of stuff. And then I come home. And for some reason, my wife just doesn't see me in the same way. And nor does my son. And eventually, if you want to grow up, you're going to have to start looking at, well, what is it that they're seeing? Now, in regards to that comment about narcissism, Daniel actually said to me, maybe about a month ago, have you considered checking into the diagnosis of narcissism for yourself? I mean, would you like to have a diagnosis after having diagnosed all these other people, you know? So I said, well, yeah, why don't I look into it? And there happened to be one of these online summits or programs run by the organization Sounds True on narcissism over about 2 weeks ago now. So there was all this, I don't know, maybe 12 or more lectures over 6 days, 7 days about narcissism. And I began to watch it. And it was just very close to home. And the essence of it really is that to the narcissist, what matters is their own experience. But they have no idea how to consider the experience of others. And when their own image of themselves is challenged, well, I can tell you this little story. I was in London in June. Why do you laugh? And
Don't mind me.
I was giving, I gave a public talk to 1,500 people in a workshop, very successful. my usual articulate, insightful, very present self, you know. And on Sunday, this was Sunday, after the workshops, and I was gonna do an interview, a TV interview on British television, and but it was delayed, so I had time to go to the Uniqlo shop to pick up some shirts. Uniqlo is a clothing shop, and I went there, and then, without going into a long story, on the way out, I was accosted by the security guard and marched to the back under the accusation that I'd shoplifted a shirt. Well, of course I hadn't, you know, which eventually they convinced themselves of, and nothing happened. But what was interesting is how did I react? So this guy who's so wise and insightful and present, I just freaked out. I started yelling and calling them names, and I mean, just, you know, it was quite a show. I'm really glad it didn't end up on YouTube. And I realized afterwards what had happened was that all of a sudden, my self-image had been challenged. They had legitimate, I won't say legitimate, but they had some reason why they thought I did that. There's something that did happen. It wasn't shoplifting or anything like that, but it was a clumsy exchange of clothing. It doesn't matter the details. But they had some reason why they thought the way they thought. Not for a moment did I consider that they're having a different experience than me. It's purely a narcissistic reaction. Otherwise, you said, okay, I see that that's what you perceive, and just look in my bag and check out the receipts, and let's just get on with it. Now that dynamic shows up a lot with my son. In fact, with everybody in my personal life, but with the son of mine who and I are working together. And it showed up also in our workshop in Toronto.
Don't worry about it, just go.
Okay for now?
I want to hear what you're about to say next.
I'm sorry.
You've caught me in a good mood.
There's this book called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's one of these little spiritual volumes that could be just 4 pages long, but it's 100 pages long because they have to write a book. But the essence of it, as often, is very, very good. And these 4 agreements are the ones that will get you through life gracefully. And one of them is you never take anything personally. So that nothing that other people do is because of you. And what others do or say is a projection of their own particular reality. Now, and the other one is don't make assumptions. Find the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want and communicate with others as clearly as you can to avoid misunderstandings, sadness, and drama. And that's exactly what Daniel did after our last workshop. So we had dinner together after the Toronto event.
Isn't there also be impeccable with your word?
Well, there's two other agreements.
Yeah, okay.
But
it concerned that, right?
But these are the two that I think are pertinent for now, if you let me speak.
Of course.
Thank you very much.
I just got excited.
Because you didn't take it personally.
No.
And you found the courage to ask questions and to express what you really wanted and needed. And that actually left me feeling very positive, a bit, as Huckleberry Finn says, not feeling too brash, but feeling very optimistic and very positive about this workshop and very excited about this workshop going on this weekend. But yeah, we don't just have to go up on stage and struggle and strain and let it all hang out and be so wonderfully honest and courageous in the eyes of so many people. We can actually tighten the ship. We can actually be intentional about it, just in the way that Daniel said, that it's not about us, it's really about what can we help other people to realize and to understand. And so what I'm really grateful for is how, after the most recent workshop, you so clearly told me what didn't work for you and what you expected in this relationship. And you said, if that doesn't happen, this isn't going to work for me. And that's very bracing. And because this isn't work like other work. This is not me going on stage and doing my usual thing. This is really having to collaborate with somebody on an equal basis. And that's very difficult, I think, for parents to come to a position of equality. When I say equality, in the sense that no longer looking on the adult child as some kind of an extension of themselves, but as an equal partner or something, whose point of view have to be taken just as seriously. Now, adult children face challenges as well of their own, and Daniel will speak to them and we'll address them tomorrow as well. I'm speaking tonight from the point of view of the parent. Let me just finish with a couple more comments, which is, Daniel and I are working on 2 books together now. The second one will be published in 2022, will be Hello Again, a fresh start for adult children and their parents. And we'll mention this Sunday morning, but for those of you that will not be there this weekend, if any of you feel you have interesting stories or problems to bring to us that would help this book project along, please give us your contact info.
Better join our mailing list.
Or join our mailing list, and we'll contact you when it comes to writing that book. And the other book we're working together is the first one to be published in 2021. And this is my book, but it's going to be written with Daniel. In fact, it is written with Daniel, and it's interesting because I've come to a point now where this is going to be a major book for me that brings together everything I've learned. But I could not be doing it without my son. I just could not write this one without him, for reasons I won't go into now, but it just, such a support. So I'm grateful to have come to that point. But long after we've signed the book contracts, we weren't working together very well at all. So what's frightening is that we're beginning to work well together, and I hope that it's going to be I'm joking, it's going to be great, but without that extra drama. But let me just end with a couple of things. I mentioned that I'm working on these 2 books. The first one is about the myth of normal illness and health and an insane culture. And just a couple of things. So I'm having to look at again, what is it that creates so much dysfunction in this culture? And it's clear that the book takes it's called a biopsychosocial view, which means that the biology of people can't be separated from their psychology or from their social relationships, which ultimately means that the whole culture that we live in shapes each of us. But the shaping unit, the actual working unit of society, where children are reared, is the family. For better or worse, in this society is the nuclear family. And parents don't realize the power that they have. So there's a study, and so I'm looking at a lot of studies. I just mentioned 2 of them. One is at Harvard University in the early 50s. They took a sample of healthy undergraduate Harvard students, and they gave a detailed psychological and medical history and medical records. And they were also asked, did they perceive they had a warm relationship with their parents, or did they not have a warm relationship? 35 years later, they revisit that cohort, and they looked at their health. Here's what's frightening, or instructive. 91% of the participants who did not perceive themselves to have had a warm relationship with their parents, with their mothers actually, had diagnosed diseases in midlife, including coronary artery disease, hypertension, duodenal ulcer, and alcoholism, as compared to 45% of the other group. Just that perception of what warm parenting did I receive accounted for doubled risk of physical illness. And on the other side, I was speaking this morning, interviewing this morning, a psychologist from Georgia, and he works with really disadvantaged Afro-American families. And they've actually shown physiologically that you take two groups, totally equivalent groups of kids and families, and you assign one of them to receive some basic training in supportive parenting, and the other one doesn't receive the same training. There's certain biological markers that you can measure that measure the aging of cells. Because the aging of cells is not simply chronological. People who are stressed, their cells age much more quickly, and you can measure these things now. Or levels of inflammation in the bloodstream. Inflammatory markers, so the more inflammatory markers there are, the more prone for illness you're going to be. So they looked at these biological markers at the beginning of the study, and then 7 years later, something like that, and the group of children that had received, whose parents had received the benefit of the program, their cells were younger, and they had less inflammation in their bodies than the children whose parents had not received that training. Same economic background, same racial oppression, really, that exists still in the southern United States. Just the quality of the parenting made that biological difference. So I'm really aware these days of the power of the family and the power of the unwitting. And it's power that parents wish they didn't have, I'm sure. But the fact is that we do. The good news is, as those studies showed, that intervention can actually make a difference. Now, in terms of this workshop, I'm actually confident that if we can de-stress the relationship between adult parents and their children, that's going to be to the health benefit of both of you. And not just to the health benefit of both of you, but also the health benefit of the next generation of kids that are maybe being raised on these families. So these studies, daunting and challenging as they are to read about, they also give a good reason for us to do this kind of work. And also I acknowledge all of you for showing up and with that kind of intention of learning something and developing something in yourself, so that the cycle of stress that we tend to perpetuate one generation to the next be attenuated, ameliorated, and possibly even ended. Thank you.
How we think we're just going through the motions, parenting, relationships, everyday stuff, and then boom, you realize how much power there is in every little interaction. Who can relate? Like, you think you're just trying to make it through the day, and then you hear stuff like how the quality of parenting can literally shape a kid's biology, and you're like, wait, what? The idea that the stress between parents and adult children doesn't just feel tense, but can have long-term physical effects. It's mind-blowing. I mean, how many of us have had those conversations with our parents or with our kids where it feels like everything's on the line? And then later you look back and think, was that moment really that big of a deal? But these studies say it actually is. And let's be real, getting to a place where parents and adult children see each other as equals, where the parent isn't treating their adult kid like some extension of themselves, that's a challenge. But it's also the key to breaking that cycle of stress. It's not just about being nice or avoiding conflict. It's about real, intentional shifts that have ripple effects on health, on generational dynamics. It's like dismantling the stuff that's been baked into families for years, sometimes without anyone even realizing it. What's even more encouraging, though, is knowing that intervention works, that we don't have to be stuck in these old patterns. By showing up and being willing to work on it, we're not just helping ourselves or our parents. We're literally affecting the future health of our kids and grandkids. That's powerful stuff, right? It's not just about mending the present. It's about reshaping the future, too. So if you're ever feeling like, why bother? These issues are too deep, too old. Remember, even the smallest shift can make a huge difference. And the fact that you're even thinking about it, that's already a step toward breaking the cycle.
But I didn't need them to be a part of it at that stage of life. So that's how it was.
Yeah, what came up for me when you were sharing that is, you talked about how possibly doing this work can spare the next generation some stress.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, when you said that, I forget what you said about grandma, about your mom. Maybe that you never shared yourself with her or something.
Yeah.
I felt this twinge of sadness. That these two people whom I loved so much and who I come from, that bond wouldn't have been stronger somehow, and that there was something in the way. And at the same time, I recognized you all survived something together that linked you forever, right? You had this. In certain ways, there were depths that didn't need to be spoken about. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks.
So I'll ask you the second question, and that'll be it for me. That is, you talk about grievances, and so what grievance? Name one grievance, the salient one that you had towards your parents, and just tell me if you really dropped it and what that dropping. You talk about it, but are you convinced that you really dropped it? Mm-hmm. And how's that showing up for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing. I don't know that I can name it, because before I identified it, it was everywhere. I also used to work at the Portland Hotel Society, a block away from here, and wonderful people. I loved my job there for 2 years, and some people were crack cocaine users, and sometimes a heavy crack user will perceive that there's bugs crawling all over them, and they'll be, scratching furiously to try to get them, and they're called, crack bugs. And no one else can see them. And it was kind of like that, and being around you guys would inflame, talk about inflammation, it would just inflame this fury, this indignation, everything you did would irritate me, and then there'd be certain flare-ups. What I realized that, again, this is a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, I began to realize that the grievance went back to my actual lived experience as a child. And it's funny, it came to me almost like a koan, like a Zen koan. It came in I was staying with you guys the week of the workshop, and we had this big blow up over something, right? And we were all doing our best. We were trying so hard, and if you could sketch a courtroom sketch of it, my dad is hunched over like this, and my mom is on the couch like this, and I'm just like. But the phrase that came to me all week that week was, "The floor is not the floor." And I knew instantly what that meant. And I remembered nightmares I used to have as a kid, where I'd be in one reality, and then I'd be in the back seat of your old Toyota Tercel, your white car, whatever it was, and I'd find myself opening a portal through the floor and falling into another reality and hoping it would be better. And it wasn't. And then another and another. And the floor was not the floor. And it was a fun home. I mean, right, funeral home, but also fun house. It was a house of mirrors for me, in my experience, where nothing was ever stable, no words ever meant the same thing, where everything was contingent on the shifting fluctuations of the subjectivities of a narcissist and a codependent. And their relationship, which took precedence over everything. Hi, Mom. And I've often said that I had 3 parents. I had my mom, my dad, and I had their relationship. And actually their relationship was dominant. And I preferred my relationship with each of them to my relationship with the 2 the two-headed dinosaur, which I once drew a very evocative picture of that my parents loved so much that they like kept it. That's where my family's weird. Oh, we're so proud of our son. It's a little dinosaur being, dominated by two big dinosaurs. In the caption, I think I wrote it when I was 6. Is this the proper way to treat a child?
That should have given us a clue.
Yeah. It did, and you took me to see Gordon Neufeld to see what was wrong with it. Which was the first time I felt seen, actually. It kind of backfired on me.
I just asked you to answer the question.
Yeah. So the grievance would be, you guys. It's actually hard to put into words. It's just like, it's not that you don't love me. It's like I said to you in Toronto. When you said to me, I realized this weekend how much you love me. I said, I don't care. Yes, I love you. You love me, I know. It's never your love that I doubted, it was your respect. And respect is not a feeling. It's a behavior. It's a guiding principle for behavior. It's something that you hold above other things. It's a priority.
Okay.
And so my grievance was that you guys didn't create an environment in which I could feel a sense of stability, ontological security and stability. Now, have I dropped it?
Yeah.
Well, I can certainly...
This minute, I mean, can I...
You're grimacing.
Is it okay if I just challenge you on that?
Why would you challenge me?
I'm not challenging you with a question. You're just curious.
Sure.
I just think grievances are more solid than that. Like you said, the grievance says, you guys didn't create an environment that ensured ontological security. Can you just go into a 7-year-old and saying, what is your grievance? Oh, my parents are not creating an environment to ensure ontological security.
Okay, so I'll put it in a 7-year-old's language. My parent, mommy and daddy, don't do what they say. They make up new rules all the time.
Okay, thank you.
They're very harsh on me. They blame me for everything, and they gang up on me. They contradict each other, and the only thing they can agree on is that what I did wrong.
Okay, great, thank you. So have you dropped it?
Have I dropped it? Hands up, everyone who thinks I've dropped it. No, let me say this. Let me say this, as Bernie Sanders would say. I'm starting to think that that's actually a fallacious question. It's a misleading question. There's a working theory under it. And the working theory is you drop it, and then, oh, look, it's been dropped. There's like a discrete moment where you drop it. I don't think that's how it ever happens, ever. I think it drops you. It lets go of you eventually, to a greater and greater extent. Yes, there are discrete moments where you start to get freer from it.
So let me ask you that. Have you experienced the shift of that?
Very much so.
Okay.
That's a more interesting question, actually. And this is instructive. Because have I dropped it? Well, there's all kinds of evidence that I haven't. You can see how heated I can get about it. But also, I'm a performer, right? And I'm actually channeling, I'm actually expressing in front of you and in front of Mom in a safe space with people the unrest that I had for years.
Yeah.
So there's actually nothing threatening about that. It's not an indictment of me that happens. It doesn't mean I haven't dropped it. But yes, I've experienced a shift.
Great.
So if we hold ourselves to these impossible standards, we let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
So what I'm asking
ourselves off.
So what is the shift?
The shift is
internally.
Yeah.
Not about ideas about us, but
right
for you.
Well, yeah, it starts with me. I have the awareness. Like one thing that's dawned on me that I can never unsee. One thing I've gotten, and I think for life I've gotten this, that I am the source of my own stability. Period. I'm the source of my own security. I'm the source of my own safety. I'm the source of my own integrity. And it feels good to say that. It feels scary to say that still. It almost feels like there's a voice in my head that says that's conceited or something. But I got to keep planting my flag in that soil, because that's the only soil I know that grants me any kind of peace, right? And then as that pertains to you, as I'm entering your home now, I don't live with you anymore, I don't even live in the same city, I'm in Victoria. As I take the ferry, as I'm driving to your place, as I step in, I'm aware of how stable I feel. I'm aware that I might be walking into a situation that might have varying degrees of stress in it. There may be some inflamed personalities, there may be some calm personalities. You guys may be getting along, you may not be getting along. And I just prepare myself for whatever. And I divest myself of the fantasy of how I hope it is and how I hope it's not, and blah, blah, blah. And then when I walk in, you are how you are. And it goes from there. And I've been finding, yes, I don't know if you've noticed, but I find myself a lot less reactive. And just more allowing of how you are, which is the only way you can be. And able, when necessary, to stand up for myself and what I'm about and say, these are my conditions.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, one last question. And it may be kind of very broad.
Well, let's take one, okay?
Yeah.
It's 8:30.
No, I'm just saying that it may open a can of worms. But it's something I've wondered about since we started, and I told you a little about this earlier. It's about chemistry. Like, I've been wondering whether there's a fundamental different and I'm not a parent yet. I hope to be. I intend to be. But I've been wondering if there's a fundamentally different just baseline chemistry between every parent and every child, just as there's a different chemistry between every person you go on a date with, right? Which is not to say that like one chemistry is better than the other in the parent-child context, but it occurred to me when I was watching a video of you, a YouTube video of you with my brother, Aaron, who's a journalist in Brooklyn at the Gray Zone. You should really follow him. He does great work. And I was watching you guys talk about a political issue, and I was really struck by how calm you were together. Just, you guys seem like best friends. Or like a father and son who just are at ease around each other. I also noticed how similar you looked, that how your complexion is much more similar than mine with yours, and how Aaron's mind and his commitments in life line up with yours. And I've noticed that for a long time.
He's just my favorite child.
But the question is, why is he your favorite child? And I'm wondering if it has something to do with chemistry, and that you and I have always had a sort of static electricity chemistry, which also produces great joy, great playfulness, great imagination, great sparks that are fun for us just as much as they are for you. But it's just different. And I wonder, as a parent, if you could speak a little bit about the experience of, that no two of your children are alike, and how that impacts your relationship. I don't know, whatever you hear in that you want to talk about.
Well, I just answered briefly, because I've talked about this before, I've written about it, but people often say, well, because given my views that physical illness, and the more research I do, the more convinced I am of it. Physical illness or mental illness, it all goes back, addiction, whatever it is. It all goes back to what happens early in life. And people say, well, but I grew up in the same family, and nobody grows up in the same family. No two children have the same parents. And no parents have the same children.
Yeah.
No parents feed the children the same way. And it's not a matter of favoritism or loving one more than the other. That's hardly the question. It is too often the question that some child will be the special one, and boy, are they in trouble. Mm-hmm. The special one is always in trouble. But the others resent it and all that. But I think in most families, it's true to say that you can't differentiate between the love, depths of love that a parent feels for one child from another. But the parenting that the child receives is different, based on birth order, based on the relationship of the parents at the time the child was born, based on the degree of stress the parents are under, or less or more, they're given with one child, than another, but based also on the temperament of the child.
Right.
Because it's true that parents are very powerful in creating that child, but the child also creates the parents. In that a certain kind of sensibility in the child, a certain kind of temperament will draw either favorable or an unfavorable or a kind of confused response from a parent.
Yeah.
Depending to the degree that the parent can actually resonate with and have some understanding of that temperament.
Dan, I'm sorry, I just need to interrupt. I'm having an issue here, which is that I really need to go to the bathroom. And I really...
Are you asking for permission? Or?
No, I'm just telling you, I'm going to get up and walk away while you're speaking.
Okay, go ahead.
But I trust that it'll be on YouTube, that I'm going to come back and listen to what you said. And I trust it will be valuable to that.
That's fine. I'll finish the answer and then we'll open up to the audience. Okay? So Daniel was our first child, and it wasn't, given the way we were, it's not that he was difficult, it's that we had a difficult time parenting him. There's all kinds of reasons for that. One is that as my first child, I just projected a lot of stuff onto him from my own infancy, which I didn't know I was doing. But I wasn't seeing him, I was seeing some representation of myself as an infant in some ways. Way over-identified. That's one thing that happened. The other thing that happened, he's very sensitive. Very sensitive. And I'm not as sensitive as he is. In the sense of feeling things as acutely and as deeply. And I had trouble understanding that temperament. And I had trouble seeing the impact of my moods and behaviors on that particularly sensitive temperament. And then he was incredibly verbal from an early age on. And he had this big booming voice, so that it's almost like Ray my wife would be pushing him this is a classic story, in the supermarket, and then little guy would be sitting in the cart, like in a shopping cart, and he was speaking this big booming voice, and people would turn around and look at who's speaking here, and they see this little 2-year-old. And so I made the mistake very quickly of starting to relate to his intellect rather than to the whole person. It was not his intellect, it was a sensitive 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old with the emotional needs of a sensitive 3 or 4 or 5-year-old. But because of incredible verbality and his intelligence and I would treat him like an equal. And I would expect him to understand things. So, your siblings were not first children. For one thing, we had learned a few things. We also had different challenges.
Yeah.
When each of them was born. So, we had a different relationship with all three of our kids, and they didn't have no. There's many things that we agree on that they had the same kind of parenting in, but each of them did experience distinctly very parenting, I think, from both Ray and I.
Yeah, and that bears out whenever we find ourselves as siblings talking about our family of origin. There'll be things that, of course, running jokes and things we all understand implicitly.
Man, it's tough to hear about that static electricity kind of bond between parent and child, how it can feel both intense and distant at the same time. There's this undeniable pull, but instead of easy warmth, it's more like sparks flying, and not always in the fun way. It's like some parent-child relationships just have this natural tension, and that can create misunderstandings, no matter how much love is in the mix. What hit me most was the bit about the grievance that Daniel carried, how it wasn't about love, but respect. That's such a huge distinction. We grow up hearing, of course your parents love you, but respect? That's a whole different level. It's not about how much they care. It's about feeling seen and valued for who you are, not who they expect or need you to be. And this idea that no two kids grow up in the same family, so real. Each sibling has their own version of their parents based on timing, stress levels, even birth order. So while one might feel like the favorite, another might feel like they're constantly misunderstood or overlooked. That chemistry between parent and child is unpredictable. It shapes everything, but it's hard to control. You can't always make it easy, even when you want to. You know, it's funny how the same family can produce such wildly different experiences for each kid. Like same parents, same house, same rules, yet somehow each child comes out with their own unique story about what it was like growing up. And the thing is, it's not just because kids are different, it's because parents evolve too. Your first kid? Total trial run. There's a lot of projection, a lot of figuring things out on the fly. By the time the second or third rolls around, parents have usually settled into a different rhythm. What's interesting here is the idea of projection. Parents unintentionally seeing themselves in their kids and responding to that version instead of who their child actually is. That's heavy stuff, right? Like instead of connecting to who your kid is now, you're reacting to your own unresolved issues or experiences. For Daniel's dad, it was his own infancy that shaped how he saw his son. And man, that happens to all of us, whether we're parents or not. We project onto our partners, our friends, even strangers all the time. And we miss the real person standing in front of us. Then there's the whole dynamic with a sensitive, verbal child. On the surface, being smart and articulate might seem like an advantage, right? But what Daniel's dad points out is how easy it was to mistake intellect for emotional maturity. Like, just because a kid sounds older doesn't mean they feel older. It's a reminder that even when someone seems capable on the outside, they might still need tenderness and patience on the inside. Especially kids. And here's a thought: what if we took this realization and applied it to everyone in our lives? What if, instead of assuming people are as strong or as confident as they appear, we remembered that underneath, there's a lot more going on? Like, how much would our relationships change if we stopped responding to people's surfaces and started seeing them for their deeper, more vulnerable selves?